10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 440. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 440 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. This week we are doing part 3 in our series on learning vocabulary the smart way. And of course, the smart way, meaning we need to learn some melodies, and then we're going to take vocabulary from those melodies to put through all 12 keys. And I think the reason that this is just so smart is that what are we doing first? We're not just learning a totally random piece of vocabulary out of nowhere in the middle of, measure 42 of the second chorus of somebody's solo. We are learning a really, really useful thing, a melody that you will probably play hundreds, if not thousands of times in your life as a jazz musician. And then we are taking vocabulary and practicing our skill of being flexible with that vocabulary, putting in all 12 keys, quizzing ourselves, finding our strengths, finding our weaknesses based off of that melody. And I think that's just so important, right? When we just have like a random piece of vocabulary that we like, there's just so much less context around it. And our brains do really, really super well with context. So for that reason, I think this is a really, really smart way and a really practical way to start to get your ability going, learning vocabulary, learning licks through all 12 keys, learning short musical phrases and having flexibility with them, making sure you play them fast, making sure that you can play them slow. All this stuff, it's really folded into this work. So while it might be simple on the surface, the only thing I'm giving you in these assignments is like, hey, learn and memorize this melody, and then take this little tiny piece of vocabulary and bring it around through all 12 keys using the tools that I've provided you. You're actually doing so much more. You're working on so many other skills. And I think it's really important whenever we can find an opportunity to do that, to work on multiple skills at once, or through doing something that's really, really straightforward, we're actually building all these different parts of our musicianship. So that's what we are after. And this week, we're going to do one of my absolute favorite bebop melodies by the great Dizzy Gillespie, Groovin' High. And this melody, I just want to give you a little bit of a heads up. There's an intro, and then on a lot of recordings, they do something a little bit funky at the end. We're actually going into the first chorus of solos to actually change keys. I don't want you to worry about that right now. And learning the intro is also optional. But if you have a ton of time and you can dedicate some serious minutes and hours to this, you might as well just go ahead and learn the whole thing. But I think that the melody is the most important. So if you're pressed for time and you're like, oh man, adding the intro is just like another barrier to me being able to get this done, just skip it. Go right from the beginning of the melody, okay? So it's a great, great melody. It has so much useful language in it. This melody is like a study in bebop harmony plus melodic devices that go a long, long, long way toward becoming a characteristic bebop jazz player. There's also countless recordings of this, so you'll have a ton of source material to work off of as far as learning the melody. Remember, I think it's really, really smart, especially if you're not familiar with this melody, to listen to it for a couple of hours or maybe even a whole day first, listen to a bunch of different versions, get it stuck in your head. Then once it's in your head, sing it out loud. Make sure that you can recreate the whole melody with your voice. Then and only then start to put it on your instrument. So if you're not even touching your instrument until like day 3 of this whole process, that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, I think that's the more preferred way to do it. Okay? So step 1, learn the melody to Groovin' High. Step 2, we are going to take one of those fantastic pieces of bebop vocabulary and we're going to put it through all 12 keys. And we're going to do it in kind of an interesting order this week. We are going to use basically the circle of fifths, and this is over a 2-5 progression, but the way that we're going to put it into all 12 keys is we're never actually going to resolve it. We're just going to go from the 2 chord to the 5 chord, immediately to the next 2 chord to the 5 chord. All right, so the first key that appears in the melody as is in the key of concert G major. We have a 2-5 in that key. Now, it doesn't resolve to that key, but we have it in that key. And that means that we're playing over an A minor 7 chord to a D7 chord, and the line sounds like this. And it has so many aspects of the bebop language in it. It starts with an arpeggio, then goes down a little scale passage, and then we do a chromatic surrounding, and then we jump away from that. It's so fantastic. It also has a really great voice leading. So we're just going to work on taking that and putting it around in all 12 keys. But as I said, we're never going to resolve. We're just going to play this 2-bar phrase and then go right on to the next key. So the first one is that one in concert G major, the 2-5. To D7. Then what we're going to do is we're just going to take that D7 chord and make it minor, which is going to be the 2 chord of the next key. And we're going to move through the keys that way. So that was D minor 7 to G7. Then we'll go G minor 7. And it has a really nice sound to it. It's actually just moving around the circle of fifths. If we put the first 3 keys together, 4-1, 4-1, and so on and so forth, right around all 12 keys. We never have to stop, and we can get through all 12 keys. Okay? So for the Patreon members, I'm going to give you a little play-along track with me playing it on keys at a bunch of different tempos so that you could test yourself. I've got the original line written out in the first key, and then I've got a little chord sheet for you so you can follow along from key to key without having to do that heavy lifting yourself. Just a little shortcut, but you still have to do all the work to bring it around to all 12 of those keys. So if you're not sure what I'm talking about with Patreon, basically we're a listener-supported podcast. If you're new to the show, we don't do any ads on the show, so instead we just rely on people like you that are listening to the show to support us and keep us going. And in return for your support, you get all of the materials, all of the jazz education materials from every single episode that's going to allow you to move really, really fast and give you some practice aids to make sure that you're getting through this material with support. So there will be a link to our Patreon in the show notes. And you can also go to 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, or you can go to patreon.com and search for the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. You'll get all the information on how to get signed up. And once you get signed up, you get instant access to actually every episode that we have ever done. So consider doing that. If you like the show, you want to keep it coming out, and you want some awesome jazz education materials to help you with this process. Quick shout out to some new patrons this week. Thank you to John and Oliver. Thank you guys so much for joining up, being part of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson family, making sure that this keeps going. And of course, to the over 350 members we have over there contributing. We really appreciate it. We definitely could not do this without you. So 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, patreon.com, search for the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, or simply click the link in the show notes below. All right. Hope you have a fantastic weekend, everybody, and we'll see you next week for the last one in this series. Bye.